Do you know how socialism seeps into a nation? Do you know how socialism seeps into America, is seeping into America as we speak? Well, that's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. And today's topic is looking at all the sneaky ways socialism, communism, collectivism, ugly, bleak, soul-sucking, dark communism and collectivism seep into a society, seep into a supposedly free society like America. And as my guest in the second segment today reports from firsthand experience, socialism / communism / collectivism is rapidly, alarmingly so, already seeping into America's culture, politics, society. Her name is Rebekah Koffler, and she is the author of a new book called Putin's Playbook, Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America. But she also worked in America's highest intelligence offices for years and has firsthand knowledge of how these sneaky communists sell their sneaky, soul-sucking communism into American society. So stay tuned for this discussion with Rebekah. But first, a quick heads up for a special offer the Washington Times is giving, particularly to Bold and Blunt listeners. That is a 50% off deal for a year's access to the digital platform of the Washington Times. Go to washingtontimes.com/Cheryl, type in your info, and you will save significantly for a full year's worth of access to all the Washington Times has to offer. That's great news, breaking news, and investigative reports. That's all these great commentaries, including the ones I write, and that's all these great podcast products the Washington Times has now, including this very one, Bold and Blunt. So I appeal to you, please subscribe. Check us out if you haven't already. Renew your subscription if it's time to renew and you are a regular reader. Or give a gift. Give a gift to one of your moderate friends in America, or leftist-leaning family members, or fellow Republicans and conservatives and patriotic Americans who are looking for the answers of what's going wrong with America. And they're not getting it from the crappy liars in the mainstream media. Well, here at the Washington Times, we work round the clock 24/7 to give you the news that's not what the crappy liars in the mainstream media are putting out. It's called, ready for the T word, truth. So check us out. I ask you, as a personal favor even, to subscribe to the Washington Times and support us so we can continue in our endeavors to bring you that T-word, truth. And speaking of truths, let's look at what's going on in America right now. Socialism in America. Some people to this very day, still scoff and say, socialism? What's socialism? It's democracy. It's democratic politics. It's maybe progressivism, but socialism? We don't have the government owning private businesses. That's not socialism. Well, you got your head in the sand if you really believe that, because one of socialists' sneakiest ways to sneak their socialist rot into a society like America is to disguise its socialism with fancy-sounding and tame-sounding phrases and names and definitions. Socialists in America aren't going to come out and call what they do socialism. They don't want to be attacked. Now, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Bernie Sanders, the Squad, and other socialists around the nation who have successfully won seats in recent elections, local and state elections, are sort of the outliers on that. They don't mind calling themselves socialist. They stand proud and loud against the Constitution, because you can't be a socialist and somebody who supports the Constitution at the same time. The two don't mix. But by and large, socialism is seeped into America's soil by tame-sounding phrases and friendly-sounding words, and so feel-good, good for the people, good for everybody, who can argue against this type of platforms and policies. And let me give you an example straight from the example horse's mouth. Klaus Schwab. Klaus Schwab, have you heard that name before? He is a German engineer and economist, right? He's in his 80s, and he founded what's called the World Economic Forum in 1971. Okay, and so the WEF every year, more than once a year, holds these high-ranking meetings, high-level meetings for some of the world's most elitist, the biggest players, the richest, the wealthiest, the ones that like to shake fingers at capitalism and free markets, all the while flying their private jet planes here and there and advising us why we need to worry about climate change and not drive our cars. So that's basically what the World Economic Forum does. But it also creates these platforms and policies to pretty much take over the sovereignty of nations, including the one we care about most, America, the sovereignty of America. So in July 2020, Klaus Schwab, at a gathering with others affiliated with the World Economic Forum, took to the stage and talked about what's called COVID-19, the Great Reset. This, the New York Times likes to say, is a phrase that's steeped in conspiracy theory. But let me tell you, there's nothing conspiracy theory about the Great Reset. All you have to do is go to weforum.org, WEFORUM, weforum.org, and look up the Great Reset. And you can see in the World Economic Forum's own words how they plan and plot and strategize to use the coronavirus and the chaos that came from the fear-mongering over the coronavirus, how they plan to use all that to clamp down individual freedoms and segue right into climate change regulatory controls. So let me play this from Klaus Schwab. You can hear him in all his German accent glory, speaking from the world stage from the World Economic Forum. Here we go.
What is the objective? What kind of world do we want to build? What do we know? What did we learn? I think the world which we want to create with the Great Reset has to be much more resilient. It has to be because security, people will demand more security, physical security, health security. It will have to be more inclusive. We had already a big gap before the crisis started. This gap will be tremendously increased. So if we want to avoid some kind of social revolutions, and we have seen the signs of anger on the streets already the last weeks, so we have to address this issue to create a stronger inclusiveness. And finally, more sustainable, because we know now that the next crisis is already waiting for us around the corner, and it is the climate crisis.
The climate crisis. See how the coronavirus is segueing very nicely into the next government-created chaotic situation. Government-created emergency. Emergency, we only have 12 years. No, at this point, it's got to be less than 12 years. It's got to be around 10 years, maybe 9.5 years. I don't know. It was just a couple years ago, it seems, the UN put out that report, IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, I believe is the formal title, put out a report saying, guaranteeing actually, not just saying, guaranteeing, predicting, prophesizing even, that America and the world would only have 12 years to sustain, 12 years left to go, unless we took dramatic and immediate action to curb carbon emissions. And so that's that phrase, 12 years to die, that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez seized upon and took to Congress, and still in Congress is predicting and prophesizing that we have 12 years to live unless we take immediate and dramatic action to curb carbon emissions. It's funny how that 12 years never changes, right? It's 12 years, 2 years ago, it's 12 years today. So according to that timeline in 100 years we'll still have 12 years. But let's look at it from the leftist line of logic. What the left is saying here, what Klaus Schwab is laying out with the COVID-19, the Great Reset, which is the World Economic Forum's title, not my characterization of what they put out. This is their actual title, COVID-19, the Great Reset. What he is putting out, what his kind is advocating is more inclusiveness, a world that has more inclusiveness. Think of what inclusive means to the left, right? Inclusive brings us things like critical race theory in America's public schools. So inclusive does not mean really include people. Inclusive, in other words, does not mean inclusive. It doesn't just simply mean inclusive, like include all. What it means is include those people that the elites and government bureaucrats have seized upon for political exploitation, to say that they have been historically not included. And so the people who have been part and parcel of, say, wealth generation, those people have to go make way for the others who have not been included in all the wealth generation that has gone on in recent times. So to clarify further, in America, inclusiveness means get rid of the wealthy and bring in the poverty into the wealthy people's homes and redistribute the wealth of the wealthy to the poorer people in order to include them into society at large. So inclusiveness to leftists is a socialist plan to take from Peter to give to Paul. Okay, let's talk about the second point he actually made. It was more secure. People want a more secure world. And then he made reference to the people who were angry in the streets. And it's sort of funny that this was July 2020 when he made these remarks, right? And people were angry in the streets. And the way Klaus characterizes it is that people were angry in the streets because of the coronavirus, because the coronavirus and the government's failure to provide every man, woman, and child with a face mask, 2 face masks if you're abiding Anthony Fauci's policies and recommendations, along with the rubber gloves and the full body armor that defends against viruses in the wind, and as well as the helmet and face shields. Because the government refused or was unable to provide those items, and because the unions were not able to secure $20 bazillion for their teachers to wear face masks at all times in school and to keep their students at home and buy the proper equipment so they could teach electronically from now in perpetuity, because the government did not provide that people were in the streets angry. Well, really, if you go back in time and look at, here we go with that T word again, truth, look at the truths of the situation. People were angry in the street because government was doing stupid things like sending police to chase down a sole runner on a beach to arrest him for violating stay-at-home orders. Or the government was doing hypocritical things like ordering every man, woman, and child to stay off the streets, stay out of school, stay out of business, stay out of churches, stay at home, and meanwhile often go merrily themselves to restaurants to congregate inside without masks, without social distancing concerns, without bothering to social distance, and to eat, drink, and be merry. So that was really the source of the anger there. People were getting kind of ticked off at these seemingly randomly targeted, randomly applied, very non-scientific, but told as if they were scientifically based crackdowns on God-given freedoms, right? So when they talk about, when Klaus, going back to what he said, his second point, he envisions the world and his minions with him in this World Economic Forum Great Reset idea, envision the world becoming more secure. They don't mean more secure funding police. God, no, they would not do that. We can't have police. We cannot fund the police. What they mean by more secure is stripping individual liberties, because if people exercising individual liberties in the street, well, that's scary, that's frightening. They do what they want. They live as they please. And that's a very insecure situation if you're a control freak. So the World Economic Forum cannot have these pesky civil liberties, these pesky individual liberties, these pesky pesky, very American ideals of rights coming from God, not government. The World Economic Forum cannot have that going forward in the future. And by gosh, security comes first. And if it means every person in the world has to stay home and abide 23-hour out of 24-hour day curfews in order to maintain security, well, that's the way the World Economic Forum will go. So the final great reset, social justice, right? Social justice leading into the inclusiveness, a police state leading into a more secure world, and finally, climate change controls, because we have to. The next emergency is right around the corner. Klaus just said it. You heard him. You heard him say that the next emergency, the next global emergency is waiting right around the corner, and it happens to be the climate. This is where the coronavirus crackdowns are going. They're feeding right into climate change crackdowns. So expect it. Expect it. Expect this is where this is leading. When you look at all these crackdowns, whether we're talking about the coronavirus or climate change, the common denominator here is fear. The common theme is the government pushing fear to justify crackdowns, lockdowns, clampdowns, and infringements on individual liberties. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how socialism / communism is seeping into America right now, because too many Americans have bought into the lies of the government about coronavirus data that has been manipulated, skewed, fabricated, falsified, twisted, turned, and spun for political reasons. The left has used the data from the coronavirus to continue the fears that the real coronavirus, in its first emerging weeks, justifiably brought. Remember the left's greatest principle, never let a crisis go to waste? Rahm Emanuel? Well, they certainly didn't let the coronavirus crisis go to waste. And now they are certainly not going to let it go to waste as they bring in this new Great Reset, which we heard in Klaus Schwab's own words, how it's going to play out in the coming months. So expect it, wait for it, prepare for it, and arm yourselves to fight for it. Arm yourselves with, once again, the capital T word, truth. And my guest today, if anybody is armed with truth, it is Rebekah Koffler. She is. And you know what? I'm just going to read the bio on her book, Putin's Playbook, Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America. Rebekah Koffler is a Russian-born U.S. intelligence expert. She worked with the DIA, the CIA. She has led, quote-unquote, red teams during war games and briefed the Pentagon, the White House, and NATO on Russian affairs. U.S. military commanders have called her a national asset, and she received the National Intelligence Professional Award. Now she's an independent consultant. And if anybody knows how socialism and communism actually seep into a society and culture, it's Rebekah. She and her family actually fled communism, came to America. And now, Rebekah, backed as she is with the intel, the data, the first-hand experiences of how collectivism seeps into a society and spreads, armed with all that, she's here on Bold and Blunt to express a warning to Americans, because she's seeing in America signs of communism, signs of Russia-type collectivism. So Rebekah Koffler, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
My pleasure, Cheryl.
Your new book, Putin's Playbook, Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America. I'm reading it now. It's proving a most enlightening book. And I just wanted to start the discussion by reading a short excerpt and getting your response to it. So in the middle of the book, you write, the bottom line, politics is war and war is politics, according to the Russian-Soviet view. And then on the next page, you write this. Lenin accurately foresaw the gullible nature of Western elites. He was convinced that deceptive tactics like, and I assume this is the Russian word for disinformation, but deceptive tactics deployed against Americans, the British, and other Westerners would enable the Soviets to fool the Western world about its true communist intentions, which were to dominate the world. This is very eye-opening, a very eye-opening statement. Could you expand on it a little bit?
Sure. From the very beginning, the Soviets absolutely despised America and feared it. They despised it because America stood for freedom and justice. They feared it because they believed that America was superior militarily, technologically, and economically. And they set out to defeat it. They knew they couldn't defeat it militarily, although they were prepared to fight a nuclear war if needed. But they're astute students of Sun Tzu, the ancient Chinese warfare strategist. And so they believed that it was possible with the right strategy to win the conflict with America, even without fighting. So they set out to subvert it by slowly penetrating major institutions and indoctrinating the members of those institutions with leftist ideologies, hoping that it will just take off like wildfire eventually.
And this is crucial for people to understand. And I want to go back to that first statement you made. Politics is war, war is politics. And what that in essence means is that Americans may look at war as something on a battlefield, something fought with guns and weaponry, but the bigger war actually takes place during the political system, the cultural system, even in times of peace. Am I correct in interpreting that?
You're absolutely correct. You nailed it, Cheryl. In fact, peace doesn't even exist technically in the Russian psyche, sort of in the Marxist-Leninist ideology. It's constant conflict. The Russians even have a special word for it, and they've adopted this word with regard to their cyber strategy, which is a completely different conception of cyber from the Western one. They believe that the fight can be fought through information, and information is presented to the opponent, and the opponent is indoctrinated with it. It can actually defeat eventually the opponent by destabilizing it and changing and transforming the entire structure of the society and the psyche of the existing culture.
Because if you defeat somebody in battle, there's always that chance of the next generation in resentment coming back and fighting you in battle. But if you change the hearts and minds of those you defeat, then that sort of puts an end to any sort of uprising, correct?
Exactly. And this is why we see right now in our schools, American schools, the prevailing orthodoxy is the critical race theory, which frightens me to death, Cheryl, because this is the ideology that is based on Marxist-Leninist foundation. The only thing that they've done is they've replaced the class structure, the division with race.
And go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So right now, I am very concerned that the young generation doesn't even view communism and socialism as something negative. They embrace it because they have been completely brainwashed. And I right now fear for my children, and ironically, I right now find myself telling my kids the same thing that my mom told me. As you know, I grew up in the totalitarian socialist Soviet Union, which eventually collapsed because of socialism. And so my mom was an anti-communist. She didn't believe in the system, and she always cautioned us, me and my sister, do not believe everything that your teachers say. Do not believe everything that you hear and see on TV and radio, and do not speak freely and share your family's views with others because it was dangerous. So right now, I tell my children the exact same thing that my mom told me back in my birth country, which I fled for freedom in America 30 years ago.
And I want people to understand just how powerful your voice, meaning how powerful your warnings right now are, because you didn't just experience all this tyranny firsthand, and your family didn't experience it and flee from it firsthand, but you also worked for years in America's intel system, so you understand the intelligence side of things, how Russia works through politics and culture, through the intelligence system to seep this rot into America.
Yes. And so this type of thinking, this ideology, was incorporated by President Putin into Russia's current strategy and arsenal of tools that Putin plans to use to target America. Because Russia, again, fears America. It also perceives it as its primary security threat. And that is why he set out to weaken, undermine us, and if necessary, defeat even with military means, and even take the conflict into the shooting realm, if you will, including the nuclear domain.
Okay, now Americans have been taught that Putin is a former KGB agent and he has basically renounced his KBG-ism. Tell us how true that is.
He absolutely did not renounce anything. It's merely impossible. Once a KGB agent is always a KGB agent, because those people are very, very carefully selected. They're selected not only based on their personality, also based on their ideology, thinking, and based on their lineage, so to speak. Even Putin's father was basically in the intelligence service. He was conducting sabotage during the Second World War behind the German lines. So this thinking that this person was whelped with is the thinking that is oriented towards destroying its primary enemy, the United States. The Soviet Union, it's not just Russia. This type of mentality existed, forever, since 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution, which is what the Russians ideally seek to create here. They seek to foment social unrest, and this is why Putin deployed his playbook targeting the 2016 presidential election and creating all sorts of disinformation that the intelligence community members who were corrupt in the top echelons, they picked it up and they ran with these hoaxes and they lied to the American people, basically doing Putin's bidding. The lies obviously were about the so-called collusion.
You know what always struck me, just as common sense curiosity about the whole Russia collusion narrative, was that if I'm Putin, I would much rather have Hillary Clinton in the White House than Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is unabashedly pro-America. He always was. He's a strong capitalist. Hillary Clinton, on the other hand, is a political animal who will do business when it benefits her political ambitions. Am I wrong in thinking that?
So, Putin is absolutely nonpartisan and agnostic in terms of his hostility to the United States. He is not pro-Trump. He's not necessarily pro-Hillary Clinton when it comes to sort of Russia's realistic ability to elect a specific president. They don't try to do that because they are quite realistic about lack of power. They don't have such power. In terms of preference, however, you're absolutely correct. They always prefer somebody who is weak, whether it's President Obama, whether it's Hillary Clinton, or currently Joe Biden, because weakness is something that they can easily manipulate. Remember how Putin was able to trick President Obama, who desperately sought reset with Russia. So Putin tricked him into believing that Russia was going to take the chemical weapons out of Syria.
Right.
And Obama bought that whole influence operation. And what happened next? Russia has taken its foothold into Syria and in the Middle East that the Russians and the Soviets haven't had for 30 years. So Obama effectively gave them a gift. And later the Russian forces fought on the side of Assad and against the U.S. forces, right? And then currently, of course, Hillary Clinton, presidential candidate, they believed also was very easy to manipulate because of all of the corruption, and they could blackmail her. And currently, President Biden has been assessed by Russia as possibly cognitively impaired and as well as weak. So no matter how much the Russians hack our network, no matter how much nuclear saber rattling goes on, we did not fight back. The Biden administration has not done anything to really respond to the devastating cyber attacks on our government, military, business networks, including our food and energy reserves. And that is absolutely unacceptable. Putin is taking lessons learned that tells them we are simply not going to respond no matter what he does.
If you had to pick, who would you say, or which would you say is the greater threat to America right now, China or Russia?
So I can't pick one or the other. They're both threats. They're different threats. China is more of a long-term economic threat. It is developing its military and it's developing capability to undermine the United States, but its preference is to undermine it economically, and we have seen that. Russia, on the other hand, is a high-risk, short-term threat. Why? Because Putin realizes that there's a window of opportunity for him to restore the great power that the Soviet Union was, the great power status, and restore the geopolitical influence that Russia had during Soviet times over the so-called strategic buffer states, the countries like Ukraine, Georgia, Belarus. So while we have a weak president in power, as assessed by Russians, it doesn't matter what we think. Half of our population may disagree with me right now. But Putin's perception is that our chief executive is cognitively impaired and has weak policies and easily manipulate. He can easily manipulate him, and therefore he will take that window of opportunity, just like he did back during the Obama presidency, and he chopped off Crimea off of Ukraine. So that is the concern, and Russia has also developed a full arsenal of both weapons and tools that they call asymmetric, such as cyber and space, that they target the United States with. And what we see in the unclassified domain, in the open source arena, is just the tip of the iceberg. That's why I wrote those books, so that people can see the rest of the iceberg for themselves.
And what's really frightening for America is that China and Russia are both using the same sort of strategy about crippling and crumbling America from within, using our culture, turning our free market against ourselves, teaching our next generation to hate America and to love collectivism and socialism. And this all works toward both those countries' favor. And now with Joe Biden, the weak one in the White House, as you say, that's the perception on the world scale. It's really it's a terrible, frightening, dark time for Americans and our freedom. So let me just finish with this one question, Rebekah. Where is the hope? Where is the silver lining in these bleak realities?
So the hope is that the American people will realize how dangerous socialism is, how ineffective it is. It is not a viable system. It's a system of total government control. My hope is that they will realize it and fight against it, and I will certainly do my part in fighting with everything that I have, because I've experienced it myself directly. So the hope is that a stronger leader comes back to power, will take the seat back in the White House, and will pursue policies that are oriented towards capitalism, which is the best system in the world. It's not a perfect system, but it's the best system. And someone strong, like the former president, who is going to pursue a very strong policy, pro-America policy, and not pro-globalist policy. That's the hope in my view.
And we should take it from somebody who experienced the tyranny and clampdowns firsthand. So, Rebekah Koffler, you have a marvelous book here, Putin's Playbook, Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America, and a dire warning that I really hope that people listening to Bold and Blunt take to heart and look to ways to fight for America. So thank you, Rebekah Koffler. Thank you for being on Bold and Blunt. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. It's a pleasure to have been here.
Critical race theory taught in public schools, a massive, massive danger. An unaware American public of how socialism and communism seeps into the country, an even bigger danger. And, as always, an American people that turns to government and not God, the biggest danger of all. Get the book, get informed, Putin's Playbook. And in the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.